I'm 34 years old. I'm Ethiopian-Canadian, and I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Nice. Do you have any thoughts on the word Habesha?
I mean, yeah, like so many. I feel like it's funny because when you first like told me about this project, like, and just like, the word Habesha, I was trying to remember like the first time I ever heard it. And obviously like it would have been from my parents. And it's like one of those words that like you sort of just like never really got like a solid definition of what it is, but you just always, well, for me anyway, I just was like, oh yeah, I'm Habesha. I don't know. I think it was always like a unique identifier, like another way of just saying Ethiopian, but like in a more like culturally nuanced way, for lack of a better term, like a secret code word. Like, oh, it's like, are you Habesha? You know what I mean? And even still, like today, I would feel like only really like Habesha people know what that means. Mind you, like I feel like Drake and like rappers and stuff have like sort of been like, oh, Habesha girls, whatever. You know what I mean? Feel like it's more like it's a mainstream word or becoming more of a mainstream word now, but it still feels very like something that just belongs to us. So I feel like I always loved that. Like I loved like even just like traveling, like going to new places and seeing a very obviously like Ethiopian or Eritrean person, and like, you make that eye contact, or you're just, and it's just like, are you Habesha? Yeah. Like I love that moment, where it's just like, oh, I found somebody else like me, it feels very like familiar, and it feels like, I don't know, it feels good for me, like if someone asks me like if I'm Habesha, I always just smile. I'm just like, yeah.
Like, do you have any ideas on the origin of the word, or like was it ever discussed throughout your life?
I want to say, if I'm like not mistaken, I feel like it's an Arabic word. Am I wrong? I don't even know. I just remember like using the word like from just like a really young age. Like I just remember like just being like, I'm Habesha. Like I feel like I was just like a little kid, and like, people would be like, well, what does that mean? And I'd be like, it means I'm Ethiopian, But it is probably like a bad thing that like I don't fully have like a fully realized like definition in my head of like what that word means or like where it comes from. I mean, I don't know if it's a bad thing, but like I probably should just know and have that like at the ready if someone asks me like, oh, well, what does that word actually mean? And I'd be like, well.
I think that's a common experience, which is why I was interested in doing this project, because I feel like there's just a lot of strong opinions and reactions to the word, but there is no solid definition amongst people I've interviewed or just in my life experience so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll never forget one time in my life, I made a girl upset when I asked her if she was Habesha. I remember being like young. I was like in my probably early 20s. And she was Eritrean, and she very much like pushed back against that word. And I was just like, got it. And I remember I think that was the first time where I was just like, And I know that there's obvious like political factors in that. And like, I don't ever want to take away from, and I'm not going to tell somebody what they are. Like if they say that they're not that, then like, absolutely, you're not that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be like, but yes, you are. Like, that's like, who am I to say that? But yeah, I think that was like the first time that I was just like, oh, we don't all like by default just like use this word. Either there's like Ethiopian people I know that are just like, no, I'm Ethiopian. Like, I'm not Habesha. And I never really like pushed us to be like, well, can you explain why? I also do feel like, I mean, the vibe shifted. So like, I feel like they weren't really like looking to explain either. And I was like, that's fair. But there's just so much. Our countries have just like, we've gone through so much in like the last 3, 4, 5 decades. And it's just like, I know for me personally, like that's just something that like, where I almost like don't have the capacity for. Like, it's not even like I want to argue or like I don't believe or I disagree, but I'm also just like, you know what? I just want peace. When I see my people, I'm just like, yo, like, I love you. You know what I mean? Like, there's already, like, I feel like a kinship. And I never want, like, something as silly as like a word to be like the thing that like puts like a divider between us.
Like when you are out and about, it sounds like you ask people if they're Habesha, like you actively use that word.
Yes.
And you actively identify with it.
Yeah.
So then like for you, what does that word mean to you? What does it signify? Like what are the visual characteristics of this word? Cultural characteristics? Yes, man.
That's a good question. I mean, at its base, I just see it like as an Ethiopian or Eritrean person. I think just like that's just like the foundation of it. And then in terms of like what does it look like? I mean, it's to answer that very literally. Like I always say like to like my friends and even like to my husband when we first met, I was like, if you see one Habesha person, like you'll be able to spot us anywhere. Got the big foreheads, you know what I mean? Like I feel like our bone structure is like very similar and it's very unique. And I think that's also something that like I love about us is that like we could be at like a huge function and like immediately just like zero in on each other. And yeah, like even just, you know, a few months ago, we were at one of my husband's friends' birthdays. And it was actually somewhere, it was like at a spot here in Brooklyn. And it was just like mad people in this like spot. And this girl just like beelined her way to me. And she was just like, she like gently touched me on the elbow and she was like, "You Habesha?" And like, it was just like this, like, I made a friend, you know, like we instantly just like, we like talked for like 20 minutes. It feels like, oh, like we family, you know, and it does really just feel like there is a comfort in being able to just like, not to get too like ethereal and like poetic, but like there is something magical about just being able to like spot your DNA like very easily, like out in the world. Like even if like neither of us are from New York, but it's just like if I were to see you on the street, I'd be like you know, like I would look at you and I would smile because I'd just be like, oh, like we're here together, you know? I just love how much we love each other. And I love how much we love back home. I love that we all say back home. That word Habesha, like it really is just like, I don't know, it feels like just like love to me.
A lot of feelings.
I do. I didn't realize that I did, but like clearly I do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like being Ethiopian, being Habesha is like something that I take a lot of pride in. I love, even like growing up, I loved being like, I'm Ethiopian, you know, like just like it really just made me happy. And I feel like Ethiopians and Eritreans like were like extremely like resilient people. And like I have like my own like qualms with like, you know, the word resilient because it's just like, you know, we shouldn't have to always be so resilient, you know. We've suffered a lot in history, you know, and I think like even just like, you know, our parents like coming to Canada or coming to the States or Europe or wherever our parents landed. Like I don't know like a Habesha kid that like doesn't know like struggle, you know? Yeah, like it doesn't have like an intimate connection with just like loss and grief and you know, just like separation of family, you know, there's a very distinct like melancholy that I think we all share. And I think for like us like people who are in the diaspora, I feel like that's why like I want us to be close. Like that's why like when I find Habesha people, I'm just like, oh, like let's be friends without even like going into like all of our like families like histories and like, oh, like tell me about like everything that your family's gone through and now you tell me what your family's gone through. It's just like we already know, you know, and it's like the details almost don't really matter. And I just feel like we can be such like a source of connection and like comfort to each other. I feel almost like protective of like each other. I feel like that when like, you know, for us Habeshas or Ethiopians or Eritreans, I'm just like, like, yeah, like I got you. Like, you know, it's like I want to support you. I want to help you. Like we need to be that for each other. You know, I feel like, okay, yeah, this is the word. I feel like the word Habesha, there's a sense of like responsibility for one another. Like regardless of like, oh, are you Ethiopian or are you Eritrean? Like for me, and again, this isn't like taking away from any like political thing, but I'm just like, it almost doesn't matter to me because I'm just like, in my mind, I'm just like, yo, like, we're the same. You know, that's how like I feel in my heart. And I'm just like, I love you and like I want you to win and like I want you to be good regardless.
You spoke a lot about what it means to you, which like you had very deep feelings, which I'm excited to explore more. But then like you also talked about like some experiences you had as like counter reactions. And beyond just reactions, it would be good to explore just like what do you think like are the cons of this word? And you also mentioned like there are Ethiopians who like don't want to identify with this word. Like if you could touch on, I know you said they didn't explain it, but like why you think Ethiopians wouldn't want to identify with the word as well.
What I can remember, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not a word that like came from us. I think that in and of itself is probably like it is a huge con. I feel like, yeah, like the fact that it's not like an Amharic or like a Tigrinya word. I mean, that in itself is probably a red flag, you know what I mean? With anything, like not even just for Ethiopians and Eritreans, I think anytime you try and put like one umbrella term to capture, you know, hundreds of millions of people and like, you know, different provinces and different tribes and you know how many languages are in Ethiopia and Eritrea, like different dialects, like it's not gonna work. It's not gonna be seamless. I feel like you could even say that it's like naive to try and just lump us all into like the Habesha term or category when, yeah, like clearly like not everyone agrees, not everyone wants that word. Even just like so far, just like stepping back from being like, oh, I'm Ethiopian or I'm Eritrean, being like, oh, I'm Gwandere or like, oh, I'm XYZ tribe or I'm this, I'm, you know, like it's we're getting a little bit more, for better or for worse, I'm not sure, like there's arguments on both sides. I feel like we're getting more insular with our identities, and that can be a really good thing. I think there's positive things in specificity and being like, no, I am this, like you know, like in just being, instead of being like, well, I'm Ethiopian or I'm Habesha, being like, no, like my family, my ancestors are from Gwanda. Like this is the place that we are from. And like I know a lot of Ethiopians who are like, they don't even say they're Ethiopian. They're like, I'm Gwandere or I'm from Gojam or I'm from Wollo and like, you know, I'm Shoa, you know.
The way you understand the word is like similar to a lot of people in terms of like understanding it as the Eritrean and Ethiopian community. Like I guess like the fact that Habesha people, regardless of what side of the border they're on, they can relate over specific cultural similarities versus like an Amara person might relate to someone from Eritrea more than someone from Oromia in terms of culture. Like how then like when it comes to this word, like do you have any thoughts there? Or,
so like how do I feel with like someone from Oromo, for example, not wanting to use the Habesha word?
Yeah, because I think it's interesting that like at least I think they're still the majority population.
I believe so, yeah.
But then they don't identify with this term.
100%. I'll be very honest with you, I don't even know if I've ever thought about it. And that's bad. That's bad. You know, like
that's the point of this project though.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're doing it. But it makes sense. Like it's like I don't have any like negative feelings about that. Cause like, and I hate to do like the generational thing, but sometimes like, you know, when I see like, you know, just like our parents' generation or like further back, like grandparents and stuff, I know that their feelings about current stuff are even more like emotionally charged than like sometimes ours are. And I'm not saying that's true like across the board, but like I do know that, you know, they lived that like time and so they feel very strongly on like whatever side they fall on. I think sometimes there's like this tendency to just like try and fit like a square peg in like a circle hole. Like it's just like, no, like just like like you're Ethiopian, you're Habesha, like just like fall in line kind of thing. And I think that's also too when I was saying earlier, like where, if someone tells me like, oh, I don't want that word, there is no argument or pushback from me because I'm very much just like, bet. I think some people take it as like a rejection of them. Like, oh, well, like what's wrong with being Habesha? Like you're too good for us, or like, but I don't see it like that. I'm just like, because I wouldn't want, like, if I were to tell somebody like I'm Gondare or I'm Hara, like I wouldn't want someone to have a negative reaction to that. I'm just like, well, I am. Like, I mean, at its core, like this is how wars start. You know what I mean? It's just like when you're trying to just like force something. And I'm just like, yo, if it's not working, like let's just drop it. I don't feel that like strongly about a word that like I need to argue with someone to like make them use that word for themselves.
At the same time that like you feel fine dropping it, you also feel very strongly about like what it means to you.
Yeah. Like I think that there's like privilege and like my emotional tie to it.
Yeah.
Right? I think like I feel like I have no qualms about like recognizing that and just being like, well, especially now that you gave me the presumed like historic context of the word Habesha about the Highlanders. And like, oh, that makes sense. It makes more sense as to why I feel like tied to it. A privilege of just like, well, like of course you're tied to it, like you're Amara. You know what I mean? It's just like, and I'm like, you're right. It's like that's fair, and like that's not something that like I even take into consideration. Like when I do use it, I'm not like fully always aware of just being like, well, I use the word because of where I'm from. When I stop to think about it, I'm just like, oh, and when you gave me the definition, I'm like, this makes sense. Like even now, just like going forward, like that's something that I'll just be more, just like cognizant of. It'll be more like forefront of mind for me. And yeah, like it makes you, I think, I don't know, I think sometimes it's good to interrogate like, well, why do I feel like close to this, or why don't I feel close to this? Like on either side, I think it's always just like a good idea to assess or reassess, like just being like, and I'm not saying that like, people have to, everyone has to immediately cease their use of the word hub. Like I wouldn't say that either.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I see no harm in just being like, well, like why am I like so tied to this word? Like why do I feel such like an emotional pull or connection to it? And there's also nothing wrong in being like, well, you are a Highlander, and like there's nothing wrong with like your ancestry. Like that's a great thing. But like, the word probably does more, or the original intent of the word was probably more meant for certain groups of people. And if we're now trying to add other groups of people and just be like, oh, you're Habesha too, it's obvious why there would be pushback. Fair. It's like, it's like, absolutely, you're right. Like, it seems like, yeah, more of us need that context about that Highlander thing. I feel like a lot of people just don't know that.
I think on one hand, a lot of what you said was very, I think, would resonate with a lot of people. Like it's nice to be able to see your person and like identify them, and you can connect, and immediately like you guys know each other. Like I've definitely had that at multiple parties. I think at the same time though, like within those features that we know to be Habesha, like there are only so many variations that are accepted within our community. Oh and then there's people who don't have those features at all. So if you could speak to like visually how Habesha looks to you, or how it's been presented to you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely how it's been presented is like, it's that Highlander look. I see the traditional like Habesha kameez, the white with our like ornate self and all this stuff. It's funny because back home in Edmonton, we have this thing called Heritage Day. Countries, it's just like different pavilions of like different countries. Each pavilion has like food and like you show off your like cultural artifacts and like dances or whatever the case may be. Like it was always just like, we looked forward because we would just like hang out at the Ethiopian pavilion, and we would just like eat injera for free. And, you know, you would drink your like little peach mango juice and you're like, we're like Ethiopian. Growing up, the adults, like they would do the dances. So like they would do like 5 or 6 songs. And they would do like they would do like a skista, and then they would do like an Oromo dance, and they would do like Walaita and a couple other ones. Like they would do like a Tigrinya song. And like it always fascinated me because we had this one guy he was part of the Ethiopian community league. Very, very dark skinned man. Like I'm talking dark, bald. He was so tall. His name was Solomon. And I just like, he was just like the kindest, like he's very soft spoken. And he was one of the dancers too. And it was funny because all the white people, they would come to the tent and like they'd watch the dances, and none of them thought he was Ethiopian, like ever. They would always be like, where are you from? Like they just thought like he was like a volunteer, and he'd always be like, I'm Ethiopian. And it became like this like running joke. And I think I remember like one time just like being like super young, being like, why does nobody think you're Ethiopian? Like for me, in my mind, I didn't get it because I was just so young. No, obviously I grew up and I was just like, oh, like you start to see like what's presented to like just in media, and like no one sees Habesha people as looking like that. Like everyone just thought he was like South Sudanese, or they didn't know where he was from. They just didn't, they were like, you're not Ethiopian. You know what I mean? Like they just never like, that never even crossed their mind as a possibility. You know, like when we go to Ethiopia, like they would take me we went to the south of Ethiopia. We've got family that lives there, you know, and like, so I think in my mind, even like as a young, I remember just being like, wow, yeah, like intracultural shock, where you're just sort of like, whoa, like the span of what an Ethiopian person can look like. I think of my mom, who is like very fair skinned, to the point where like growing up, people thought she was like Egyptian or something. Like people didn't even think she was Ethiopian because she was so fair. To Solomon, who was, you know, this like 6'6", you know, dark skinned black man, and everyone was just like, oh, you're not Ethiopian. I do try to always like remind myself, and also just remind others that like, yeah, we're not a monolith, and like we do look very different. We don't all look like that. You know what I mean? Like that's not the prototype. And I think people, especially with, I don't know, especially maybe it's just because like, you know, I'm Ethiopian, so that's just like what I'd be focused on. I'm sure it happens with other countries and stuff too, but like I try to resist a prototype at all. I mean, we don't need a prototype, and maybe that's the same thing with the word Habesha. Like it's become like this prototype signifier. I'm unpacking things today. Even just like with something that I've noticed too, just even coming from Canada to the States. Like obviously, like my husband is American, his friends are American. Even just like their concept of what like Habesha is, like they would always be like, oh my God, like hook us up with your Habesha girlfriends. Like, oh my God, like we Ethiopia. And I'm just like, and I would tell them like when you say Habesha girl or Habesha woman, like I remember like to like describe what that person looks like. And like, it's very much like, you know, the Lola Monroe of like, you know, it's like, oh, she's got you know, she's a little light skin, or maybe just like a little brown skin, and like she's got the soft hair. That is just very much like, yeah, for lack of a better word, the prototype that has been, I don't know if I want to say pushed or just like, yeah, pushed. Like that's just like, that's what we look like. That is the typical and also the ideal Ethiopian Habesha woman. Yeah, like I bristle at that because I'm just like, well, I know for a fact that that's not the typical, you know what I mean? Like we're not in the majority, you know what I mean? Like the typical would probably be like what an Oromia woman looks like, you know, because just off of like population statistics alone, if we're going to do just like numbers, you know, but people don't ever take that into consideration. It does become a game of desirability and like all of that.
And like, how would you say that's like been within our community specifically? Because we're about to get to that outside of our community, kind of like where you were going with your husband's friends.
I jumped ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. But I think also it's interesting to what you said, because it's like, yes, like colorism exists. Colorism and anti-Blackness exists everywhere, but it's also very interesting that within our community, I remember growing up, like my family, I relaxed my hair, and like that was the worst thing I could have done. They were like, you have this beautiful curly hair, and it was like my life, and like when I cut it they thought I was like, it felt like I was killing them. Like that's how dramatic it was.
I know.
But it's like, I don't know how these beauty standards got so stringent within our own community. They do not aspire to whiteness, but they absolutely do not aspire to darkness. You know, it's a very specific, this brown, this characteristic.
You hit the nail on the head. Yeah. Honestly, that's something that like I've thought about a lot in my life. And I have the same question that you have, where it's just like, where did that come from, like within us? Because like, yeah, as you said, like they're not checking for white people. They're like, no, she's not beautiful. Like, no. But like, as you said, it's also like, you know, I remember just like so many like aunties growing up, just like very much not wanting you to like be out in the sun all day, or like they would be like, oh, like it's a quarter bush, like you got dark, you know, or it's just like, oh no, like, you know, like in their heads, like you got a summer tan, and they were just like, oh God, you know. Like in the wintertime, like I get super, super light because like there's no sun, you know what I mean? And then, yeah, like in the summertime, I'd be outside and like I would get darker. And I'm not gonna say dark, but like I would get darker. And like I just remember like aunties growing up, like in the wintertime, especially in Canada, our winters are long. They would always be like, oh, you look so, you know, like you look like Yamro Basha, like you look so, you know, and it's just like, because I'm hella light right now. Because even like Ethiopian, Eritrean men, like just when they talk about like the kinds of like women that they're looking for, you know?
Yeah.
I'm like staring at you like, yeah, that colorism stuff within Habesha people, I don't know where, like I said, colonialism, you know, it bleeds into everything, and it like just like rots people's brains, where it's just like, so I'm just like, how can you look at your own daughter and just be like, oh, you're getting dark, and like say it as like a bad thing, you know what I mean? And to just look at her like, like what man will want you, you know? And that to me just seems like insane. I hope that dies out with us, but I don't know. I feel like just like I don't even know how to wade into those waters.
How would you understand your identity as an African?
Oh yeah, see, and that's interesting, because the African Students Association at my university, the University of Alberta, that was the first group I joined. Just like I was so excited to just like hang out with and like volunteer with and spend time with and like study with like other Africans, because I always very much just like, I think I craved it. Yeah. I think I always was just like, I know Edmonton has like a large African population, but because we all just like hang out with like the Nigerians hang out with the Nigerians, and the Senegalese people hang out with the Senegalese people, and like the Hausa people like there was very little like mixing. And I think that African Students Association was like the first and really just like the only opportunity to like really mingle with each other. So for me, like my African identity from university going forward was always just like, even like I find myself like on Twitter being like, oh, I'm African, you know what I mean? I find that like just being like, oh baby, no, like I'm African, like we don't do that, you know what I mean? I love being from Africa. I love telling people I am African. Again, it's like another source of like pride thing for me, where I'm just like, yeah, I love that we're just a black ass continent. I love that for us. I love that about us. And then, you know, you get into the diaspora wars, where it's like, I mean, you see it probably on Twitter all the time, of just like African Americans fighting with Africans. Because yeah, I don't know if that's a unique thing to Habesha people,
The war, the diaspora wars.
Yeah, there is this disdain from African people towards African American people. You gotta be distinct from everybody. You know what I mean? like, are we just like our like own little island where it's like, no, like it's everybody else and then like there's us. And I do think that a lot of people see it that way. In a way, it feels very like counterintuitive because I'm like, you do feel like an affinity to blackness because it's like you do see like, but at the same time, it's like you don't want to associate with like blackness here. You do feel some sort of like emotional tie to this like quote unquote great black nation. But then when it comes to like blackness as it's like packaged here, you're just like, well, no, it's different. I've experienced it in reverse a lot. Like I've had a lot of men, hoteps, be like, oh, you're not black. And I'm like, what am I? Like, I am a black woman. Like I identify as a black woman, and like the world sees me as a black woman.
Well, I guess kind of going back to like you being Canadian, you mentioned a couple of times like the difference between, well, not really difference, but just how Americans have been perceiving you. Like, what is the difference between your Habesha identity in Canada versus the United States?
It's a really good question. I haven't like met a ton of Habesha people here. Like, it's not like Dallas or Seattle or like DMV where it's just like, oh my God, like everywhere you turn, you're just like, Paulos, or you know what I mean? Especially like being in the Bronx, like it's just like, you know, mostly like Puerto Rican people or just, you know, African American people. And even just like talking to my husband and him just being like, oh yeah, I didn't really like grow up around or I didn't even know a lot of African people. And I'm just like, what? Like to me, like that's just like mind blowing, you know? Like even just in our neighborhood, like where I grew up back home, it's just like our apartment building, like it was just like mad, like Middle Eastern people and Indian people and Sri Lankan people and African people. Like it was just like so many different immigrants. And, you know, when I talked to my husband, he's like, oh, I just like grew up around like Dominicans and Puerto Rican. Like, I'm just like, I don't think I've ever met a Puerto Rican in Canada. You know what I mean? Where he's just like, what? I'm like, they don't go to Canada. You know what I mean? Like they go to New York. I think now as we get older and we're, you know, I have a kid, like some of us are becoming the new parents of our generation. I think we're still very much in the early stages of figuring out like what our identity is as Ethiopians and Eritreans here.